The air inside the Mirage was thick with perfume, exhaustion, and ambition, a mixture so dense it seemed to press against my chest as I tried to balance a cocktail tray carrying 4 martinis. The bass thudded up through the wooden floor, vibrating through the worn soles of my sneakers and into my bones, a reminder that this was my second shift of the day. 6 months had passed since I'd taken this job at one of downtown Chicago's most luxurious nightclubs, and still, I hadn't learned how to make myself invisible when I needed to. A man in a wrinkled suit, reeking of whiskey, staggered into my path. One of the martinis tipped, spilling cold liquid across my fingers and down my wrist, soaking the sleeve of the only decent black shirt I had left. "Sorry," I murmured, though it wasn't my fault. Of course, no one heard. Ahead was the VIP section, a raised platform separated from the main floor by velvet ropes and 2 tall, unsmiling guards with earpieces. Vanessa, the seasoned hostess, had warned me during my first day of training, never look a VIP guest in the eyes. They don't want to know you exist unless they need something. Her tone carried the practiced indifference of someone who'd said it too many times, especially on Thursdays. Thursdays, the nights when the real owner of the Mirage sometimes appeared. I had only seen him twice before, or rather, glimpsed him. A shadow among lights, always surrounded by men in tailored suits and women glittering with jewels. Everyone seemed to lean toward him, like sunflowers chasing light. I'd once heard Tina, a close coworker, whisper his name during our break, only when no manager was near. Dominic the Quiet. She said that at 37, Dominic controlled nearly every nightlife venue in Chicago. People whispered that those who crossed him either vanished or returned. Incomplete. His family, they said, had old Italian roots, so old that even the police preferred to look the other way. I didn't want to know more. I just needed this job to cover rent and my sister Sophie's hospital bills. She was fighting lupus, one day at a time. One of the guards at the velvet rope recognized me and quietly unclipped the barrier. I kept my head down, setting each glass on the sleek mirrored table beneath the dim amber light. 4 martinis, I said softly, stepping back so no one would notice the one that had spilled a few drops. Wait. A low, precise voice behind me froze every muscle in my body. My heart pounded against my ribs as I lifted my gaze just enough to see 4 people at the table. 3 polished, glamorous women and 1 man I'd never seen before. He didn't need to move or speak. The room's energy bent toward him on its own. Dark hair, slicked neatly back. A face that could have stepped out of a Renaissance painting, sharp, cold, unreasonably beautiful. His eyes were deep enough to swallow the strobe lights flashing through the club. The suit he wore was immaculate, cut perfectly to his frame, unbuttoned just enough to reveal tanned skin and the edge of a tattoo. He didn't look at me. His right hand held a phone, his left lifted slightly. 1 finger extended a silent command to stay. "Sir," I stammered, my voice barely louder than the music. "This drink is wrong," one of the women said, her red-painted nails pointing to a glass. "I ordered a dirty martini." "This one's not dirty at all." I swallowed. "I'm sorry. I'll replace it right away." The man still hadn't lifted his gaze. "What's your name?" he asked, his English laced with something Italian, smooth as velvet. "Madeline," I said, and instantly regretted using my real name. He finally looked up. His eyes brushed over my face, paused at my lips, then drifted down to the wet fabric clinging to my wrist. I couldn't tell whether that look was judgment, irritation, or curiosity. "Madeline," he repeated slowly, tasting it like wine. "Bring the correct drink, then come back." He turned to the woman who had complained. "And bring yourself a new shirt. That one's ruined." His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. If you're still listening, perhaps you can feel Madeline's heartbeat quicken, and perhaps sense that something is about to begin between her and Dominic. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share, so you don't miss more stories filled with mystery and emotion each day. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Every comment tells us how far our stories have traveled, how many hearts they've reached around the world. I nodded so quickly I almost spilled the tray again. Retreating from the VIP area, forcing myself not to meet those dark eyes a second time. It felt as if I'd stepped out of a frozen bubble of air. I slipped through the crowd toward the staff room. In the cracked mirror, my reflection looked paler than usual, eyes wide and dazed. Sweat dampened my temples even though it was freezing outside. Tina was reapplying lipstick. She stopped mid-stroke when she saw me. Maddie, you look like you've seen a ghost. I tried to smile, my voice hoarse. Just served a VIP. Her eyes widened. Wait, not him, right? Dominic? I didn't answer, but the look on my face was enough. She grabbed my arm. Listen, Maddie, if it was Dominic Rinaldi, you need to be careful. He's not like the usual drunk rich guys. He's the kind of man who, once he's seen you, you can't pretend you never existed. I pulled on my spare uniform shirt, the only one left in my locker. Too tight at the chest, sleeves too short, collar stiff as cardboard. I fixed my hair, grabbed the fresh dirty martini, and returned to the VIP section. Along the way, I noticed a few of the other servers glancing at me with a strange kind of knowing, as if they understood something I didn't. When I set the glass down, Dominic was speaking with an older man, silver hair, commanding presence, the sort of person even his bodyguards treated with respect. Dominic didn't look at me again. I slipped away quietly, a strange relief fluttering in my chest. But it didn't last. Around 2 a.m, the dance floor was still heaving like a stormy sea, and my legs trembled after 10 hours on my feet. I was collecting empty glasses when a hand clamped around my wrist. Dance with me, gorgeous. A slurred voice breathed whiskey against my ear. I turned to find a man in his 30s, slick hair, crooked tie, a smirk that reeked of entitlement. I'm working, sir. Please let go. I tried to pull back, but his grip tightened. Just one dance. Don't be shy. I'm not shy. I'm a waitress. And you're hurting me. I raised my voice, hoping security might notice. But the music was deafening, the lights chaotic, and everyone was lost in their own little world. He laughed, leaning closer. You're even prettier up close. Playing hard to get, huh? I jerked my arm sharply and bumped into someone behind me. The crash of breaking glass rang out, a drink hitting the floor. I spun around to apologize, but the words died on my lips. Standing less than a step away was Dominic Rinaldi. His expression was calm, but the chill in his eyes silenced the noise around us. His 2 guards stood behind him, waiting for a cue. Is there a problem here? His voice was low, steady, cutting through the air. His gaze slid from me to the man still clutching my wrist. The stranger gave a nervous laugh. No problem, just asking her to dance. Dominic's face didn't change, but the atmosphere thickened. She's working. And she said no. Didn't know she was taken, the man muttered, stepping back, finally releasing me. A muscle flickered in Dominic's jaw. Dance with me, he said, eyes locked on mine. I froze. Some unspoken alarm went off inside me. He leaned closer, his breath grazing my neck. Dance with me? Let him see you're not alone. As if on cue, the crowd's attention shifted elsewhere. No one watched, no one heard, no one interfered. Dominic's guards stepped back, forming a small circle of space around us. Before I could comprehend what was happening, his hand was on my waist, warm, steady through the thin fabric of my shirt. His other hand found mine, guiding me into a slow rhythm, utterly out of sync with the electronic chaos around us. I need to get back to work, I whispered, though my body didn't move. Your shift ended 10 minutes ago, he replied. I told your manager. The fact that he'd rearranged my schedule without asking should have made me angry. Instead, I felt something else, a trembling somewhere deep inside my chest. Why did you do that? I asked, my lips almost brushing his jaw. Dominic looked directly into my eyes. Maybe because I don't like seeing my employees harassed. I can handle myself. He smiled faintly, as if reading my thoughts. I believe you, Madeline. But tonight you don't have to. Hearing my name in his voice made my heartbeat stumble. His hand stayed at the small of my back, holding me close. And in that fleeting, suspended moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer invisible to him. The music still pulsed in waves, but I could barely hear it anymore. Everything seemed to slow within that dance. His hand on my back didn't move, yet the warmth from it spread through me like a quiet current of electricity. My body, betraying reason, followed the rhythm he led. I didn't know where to place my other hand, didn't know if my gaze was too revealing. All I knew was that my heartbeat had lost its rhythm. People will see, I whispered, realizing we had become the silent center of the VIP floor, though no one dared to stare for long. Let them, Dominic replied, his eyes never leaving mine. It's safer that way. Safer. That word echoed through my mind as he turned me gently, then drew me back against his chest. The motion was too smooth, too practiced. It was clear this wasn't the first time he'd used a dance as a weapon. But I had no time to analyze. The song ended. No one applauded. Dominic stepped half a pace back, his gaze still holding me. "Thank you for the dance, Madeline Carter," he said, his voice so low I felt it in my ribs. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he took out a black business card, no logo, no name, only a string of silver embossed numbers. He placed it in my palm, his fingertip brushing lightly against my skin. "If anyone bothers you here or anywhere, day or night, call this number." I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already turning away, dissolving into the crowd as though he had never stood there with me. His bodyguards followed instantly. I stood still, feeling as if I had been pulled from a dream, or perhaps fallen into a trap too sweet to recognize. I clenched the card in my hand like a charm and tucked it into my pocket. When I stepped outside the club, snow had begun to fall. The flakes landed silently on my thin jacket as I crossed the street toward the night bus stop. I didn't know whether Dominic was watching me leave. I didn't turn around to find out. When I reached the small apartment I shared with my sister, everything was unusually quiet. I took off my shoes, hung up my coat, and moved softly through the living room. Sophie was asleep, her floral blanket pulled up to her chin, still clutching her iPad mid-documentary. I turned off the screen, adjusted her blanket, and went to the bathroom. The old shirt stained with martini lay in the laundry basket, its dried patch leaving a faint brown trace. I changed clothes, washed my face, and slid into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. In my hand was the black card, its surface cool and smooth, the row of numbers glimmering faintly beneath the lamp. I'd seen strange things during 6 months at the Mirage, but I had never been the center of any of them, and certainly not the focus of the most powerful man in the room. I didn't know why he had noticed me, didn't know why he'd left me this. Yet my instincts, the same instincts that had helped me survive all these years, told me it wasn't trivial. And when I finally closed my eyes, what I saw wasn't the crowd, or the dance floor, or the flashing lights, but his hand clasping mine steady, warm, and those dark eyes looking at me as if he'd seen something I'd never dared to believe existed within myself. I woke to the pale light of morning seeping through the curtain slats, and Sophie's voice drifting from the kitchen, calm and familiar as always. She was forever up before me, illness or not. I stepped out and found her rummaging through the medicine cabinet, her hand trembling slightly, her lips pressed together in quiet defiance. "Your joints again?" I asked, my voice still rough. She nodded. "Same as every morning. I'm used to it." She turned and gave me a small, brave smile, the kind that broke my heart even as it warmed me. I poured her a glass of warm water, washed my face, and sat down at the little kitchen table. For a few minutes neither of us spoke, until Sophie looked at me closely. "Something's up, Maddie." I lifted my head. "Why do you think that?" "You're distracted, flushed. What happened during your shift?" I hesitated, ready to say nothing. But the memory of the dance, the hand on my back, that look, and the black card still in my wallet stopped me. "I met the owner," I said, trying to sound casual. "He seemed to notice." Sophie's eyes widened. "Dominic Rinaldi, the nightclub king, the polished Mafia guy you said never looks at his employees?" I laughed softly. "Yeah, that one." "And what did he do?" "Not much. I was being harassed by a drunk customer. He stepped in. Then, we danced." Sophie's mouth dropped open. "You what? Danced? With him?" I nodded, trying not to show my confusion. "Probably just his way of getting the guy off me. Then he had someone drive me home. Gave me a card with a number. I pulled it from my wallet and set it on the table. Sophie picked it up, turning it over. No name, no logo, just numbers." "Right. What could it mean?" "I have no idea." She studied me for a long moment, her expression suddenly serious. "Do you think he knows something about you?" I was about to laugh it off when the phone rang. I glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m., too early for any normal call. I picked up. "Madeline Carter?" A calm, professional male voice said. "This is Paulo. Mr. Rinaldi sent me. The car is waiting downstairs. I'll be taking you and your sister to the hospital." My grip tightened on the receiver. "I didn't book a car." "How do you know my sister has an appointment today?" "Everything has been arranged, ma'am. We'll be waiting." I set the phone down, my pulse quickening. Sophie was watching me, puzzled. "A private car," I said slowly. waiting outside. From him. "Should we go?" she asked. I didn't answer, but 5 minutes later we were both in coats and wool hats, supporting each other as we stepped into the elevator. A sleek black car waited by the curb in front of our old building. A gray-haired man in a black suit and leather gloves stood beside it. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Miss Sophie." He bowed politely and opened the door. Inside, the seats were soft leather, warm with built-in heaters, scented faintly of cedarwood. Sophie sat frozen in awe. "Are you sure this is safe?" she whispered as the car pulled away. I wasn't sure, but looking at her pale face, I felt only one thing. For the first time, a hospital visit wasn't a burden, and I was too tired to refuse kindness, even if it came from a man like Dominic Rinaldi. The medical center lay nearly 20 minutes by car from our apartment, yet the drive slid by with a strange quiet this morning. No more 3 crowded bus transfers, no more guiding Sophie up freezing steps or waiting in lines with other weary faces. Paulo pulled up right at the main entrance, stepped out first, opened the door for Sophie, then turned to steady me with a gesture so practiced it seemed he had done it hundreds of times. I started to thank him, but he only inclined his head. "I'll wait here until you and your sister are finished." We stepped inside, and I felt the difference at once. A young nurse hurried over the moment I showed our appointment card, leading us down a private corridor with no waiting at all. Dr. Patel, who oversees Sophie's treatment, appeared almost immediately, her smile gentle, though something curious flickered in her eyes. "You look more radiant than usual today, Miss Carter," she said as she handed a chart to the nurse and glanced toward Sophie being helped into the exam room. I nodded, trying to smile. "Yes, because my sister didn't have to walk 3 blocks in the snow," the doctor hummed in agreement. I was surprised to receive notice this morning about a change in transportation and payment for services. From a personal account? No name. My fingers tightened around my bag strap. "Do you know who's behind it?" She shook her head. "Not officially, but I've seen this kind of sponsorship before, and usually the person does nothing without a reason." When she turned away, I sank into a chair, restless. The black card in my pocket felt hot. I took out my phone, woke the screen, and stared at the number I had already entered last night, but hadn't dared to dial. I didn't understand why Dominic was intervening so deeply. I didn't understand how he knew Sophie's appointment schedule. I had never told anyone at the Mirage that my sister was seriously ill. I had never mentioned where I lived or the monthly bills that smothered me, and yet he knew. He knew clearly. He knew down to the last detail. I pictured how a man like Dominic Rinaldi gathered information. Men like him didn't ask. They sent people. They quietly turned your life inside out the way someone flips through a book. A chill slid along my spine. Twined with it, though, was something more tangled. The feeling of being seen. It had been so long since our mother died, since our father was gone, since Sophie first fell ill, since I had been the center of anyone's world. I had been the caretaker, the fixer, the one who vanished behind the curtain so the stage could stand. And now a man like Dominic knew me this well. The sensation made me want to run, even as I couldn't look away from that phone number. When Sophie came out nearly 1 hour later, color had returned to her cheeks. "The doctor says my numbers are better than the last few times," she said, eyes bright. "Maybe by the end of this month I'll qualify to try the new therapy." I smiled, a small weight lifting inside me. "Good. Very good." Sophie squeezed my hand. "I don't know who this boss of yours really is, but if what he's doing helps me hurt less, I think I'll be grateful to him for the rest of my life." I didn't answer. When we stepped back outside, Paulo was already there with the car door open. On the ride home, I said nothing, but my thoughts circled a single question. What did Dominic Rinaldi know about me, and why did that knowledge make me feel both rescued and stripped bare? That evening, just as I set my bag on the chair, the phone rang. An unlisted number flashed across the screen, and my heart skipped. I stared at it as if, by looking hard enough, I might see what waited on the other end. I still answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "This is Madeline." "It's Dominic," he said, his tone low and crisp, not waiting for confirmation. "Tonight I'd like to take you to dinner. Not at the Mirage, somewhere quieter." "Why?" The question slipped out before I could weigh it. He paused for a beat, then said, "Because I want you to know why I care, and you deserve to hear it from me." I swallowed. The bluntness was such that I couldn't refuse. Dominic didn't promise, didn't circle, didn't gild. He simply set the fact down and left the choice to me. How long? In 18 minutes, Paulo will be at your door. He hung up after that. No goodbye, no space for me to retreat. I didn't know what I was doing as I stood before my small closet, choosing a simple, modest, dark brown knit dress. I tied my hair up, touched on a faint wash of lipstick to soften the pallor, and shrugged into a wool coat. Sophie was reading in her room. I didn't say where I was going, only that I was meeting a friend. She gave me a puzzled look but asked nothing. Paulo arrived exactly as promised, and the car slid through winter-dark streets, not toward downtown this time, but into a quiet neighborhood near the lake. The iron gate opened without a sound, revealing a classical stone house with a dusting of snow across its gray walls. I hadn't expected Dominic to live in what felt like an Italian country estate set down in the middle of Chicago. The door opened to a silver-haired woman with a kind gaze. "Miss Carter, welcome. The master is waiting in the dining room." Cedar mingled with herbs in the warm air as I stepped inside. The house was unexpectedly cozy, free of the icy perfection such spaces often wear. Dominic stood by the fireplace, white shirt sleeves rolled, tie loosened. He looked up when he saw me, not smiling exactly, but the edges of his gaze softened. "Thank you for coming." I hesitated. "I'm not sure why I'm here." "Because you need answers, and I owe you that." We sat. Everything had been prepared. A simple dinner of roasted fish, vegetables, and white wine. He ate little, mostly watching me. I wasn't used to this kind of quiet, so I spoke first. "What do you know about me? More than you think, and less than I want." The reply stilled my fork. "Why?" Dominic turned his glass slowly. "Because I once knew someone like you. Lived quietly, kept the whole thing upright with her bare hands. And because I don't like being in anyone's debt, especially to someone who has courage. I'm not brave. I just have no choice. And that," he said, holding my eyes without judgment, "is exactly what sets you apart." His voice softened. "Madeline, I know you don't need saving, but sometimes someone steps into our life not to save us, only to remind us we don't have to carry it alone." I looked at him. Doubt and a yearning to believe knotted together. He tilted his head, voice dropping. "I didn't ask you here just to say thank you. I need you to be careful. What you're walking into is more complicated than you think." "What do you mean?" "Your father, Thomas Carter, didn't die the way you believe." I went still. The sentence snapped every thread of thought. Dominic set down his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. "And he isn't only alive. He's being hunted. And I believe you are the one person who can draw him out." For several seconds after Dominic's words, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink, each heartbeat sounding slow and heavy, like a distant drum. I must have misheard him. I had to have misheard him. "What did you say?" My voice barely sounded like my own, as if it came from someone else. Dominic didn't repeat himself right away. His gaze on me was no longer calm but careful, as though he were disarming a bomb. "I know you believe your father died in an accident when you were 14. The report confirmed it. There was a death certificate, a funeral, everything. But there was no body. And that, Madeline, was the first thing that made me question the story." I shook my head and rose from the chair. "No, that's impossible. My sister and we lost him. My mother cried for months. We lived under that shadow our entire lives. And after that supposed death, your world fell apart. Your mother broke down, lost control of the finances. You started working before you were even of legal age. Sophie got sick, and there was no one left to protect either of you." I turned away so he wouldn't see the sting in my eyes. Everything he said was true, and that was what terrified me most. Dominic stepped closer, stopping just far enough that I could still retreat if I needed to. "I don't know the whole truth," he continued softly. "But a few weeks ago, an arms deal was interrupted. One of the men escaped, using a false identity. He left a trace, a fingerprint. It matched a file belonging to a man named Thomas Carter. Your father." I turned to face him, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. "You're telling me my father didn't die? That he abandoned his wife and 2 daughters without a word and lived like a ghost for nearly 20 years? I don't know why. Maybe to protect you. Maybe because of something larger. But he's alive, and he knows you are too." Dominic's eyes were no longer cold. They held a sadness so genuine I couldn't hate him for it. "He may have tried to reach out. He may have been closer than you think. I sank into the chair again, head bowed, heart pounding to the point of pain. Faded memories flooded back, dim lights at the funeral, murmured adult voices, half answers that never made sense. My mother had always avoided talking about the accident, saying only that it happened on a business trip. She never described it, never explained. I'd never questioned her because I was too young. But now everything was coming undone, piece by piece. Dominic sat across from me, not touching me. I know this is too much, but there's one more thing you need to see. He slowly pulled a small black and white photograph from his pocket. It looked old, taken on film. A man with graying hair and hollow cheeks stood beside a truck in some marketplace, handing something to a child. The face was unmistakable, the same one I'd seen 1,000 times in dreams, the face I'd believed was gone from the world forever. The picture was taken outside Florence. 3 weeks ago, Dominic said quietly. I didn't know which hurt more, the truth that my father was alive, or that he hadn't chosen to come back. Yet somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the shock, a faint memory stirred. His voice on a rainy night long ago telling me, if one day you can't find me, don't think I left you. Some people have to disappear to protect what they love. I hadn't understood then. Now I wasn't sure I wanted to. I don't remember leaving Dominic's estate, only that night had fallen. Snow was thick in the air, and I felt hollow, as if my memories had been stripped from their walls. Paulo drove me home without asking a word, but this time I couldn't stay silent. A storm raged in my head, anger, doubt, and a growing fear that pressed heavier by the minute. One thing was certain, I had to get Sophie out of here tonight. If my father was alive and being hunted, then we, his only family, couldn't possibly be safe. I felt it not just from Dominic's words, but from the way he'd looked at me after showing the photo, as if measuring every reaction, as if behind that truth lurked another, darker one. When I stepped into the apartment, Sophie sat on the living room floor, surrounded by open books, studying vocabulary. She smiled when she saw me, but the smile vanished the moment she saw my face. What's wrong? What happened? I didn't answer. I went straight to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out an old duffel bag. What are you doing? She asked, her voice rising. We have to go. Tonight. Go where? I don't know. Out of the city. Somewhere safer. Aunt Emma's for now, anywhere no one knows. Sophie jumped up, following me, alarm in her eyes. Maddie, you're scaring me. What's going on? I stopped packing and faced her. Sophie, I'll tell you everything, but not now. You have to trust me. Grab only what's necessary, your meds, papers, warm clothes. We're leaving for a few days, just until I figure things out. She nodded slowly, torn between belief and confusion. We packed everything in 15 minutes. I slipped Dominic's black card into my wallet, grabbed my phone, charger, and the few $100s I'd hidden in an old shoebox under the bed. As I locked the door and pulled Sophie into the hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed from below. 3 men in black coats were moving quickly up the stairs, their eyes sweeping each apartment as if searching. I gripped Sophie's hand and whispered, "Emergency exit." We turned back, running toward the far end of the hall, pushing open the heavy door to the old fire stairs. Each step on the metal treads clanged like a shout in the still night. At the ground floor, I shoved open the back door leading into the narrow alley behind the building. Snow came up to our ankles, biting cold, but there was no turning back. I didn't know who those men were, but instinct told me Dominic wasn't the only one watching us. I dragged Sophie through the alley, turned onto the main street, and waved frantically at a passing cab. When it stopped, I said quickly, "The nearest interstate bus terminal, please." The driver nodded, glanced at us in the mirror, and asked nothing. I wrapped my arm around Sophie, trying to keep her warm, my heart still hammering since the moment I'd seen those men. We rode in silence. When we arrived, I paid in cash and led her inside, where loudspeaker announcements blended with the hum of travelers. I scanned the departure board for anything leaving Chicago soon. There was a bus to Milwaukee departing at 2 a.m. I bought the tickets without hesitation. While we waited, Sophie rested her head on my shoulder, eyes half closed. I brushed her hair gently, my mind a tangled knot. I had lost my mother, believed I had lost my father, and now that I knew he was alive, I was running again, this time from the truth itself. I didn't know what I was escaping, only that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something larger, darker, and, perhaps, irreversible. The apartment on the 30th floor overlooking the Milwaukee River was the last place I ever thought I would find myself on a freezing December morning. But after a long night on a crowded bus, with Sophie asleep against my shoulder and my eyes fixed on the window, terrified that an unfamiliar car might be following us. I called the number on the black business card. There was no ring, only an automated voice asking me to state my name and situation. I didn't know why I obeyed. Yet I said the words, "Madeline Carter, I need a safe place for me and my sister." 10 minutes later, a message arrived with an address and an entry code. No signature, no explanation, just a line of text glowing coldly on the screen as if it had been prepared long before I ever called. The apartment was in an upscale district in the northern part of the city, the kind of place where a month's rent could cover an entire year in our old neighborhood. The doorman seemed to have been notified in advance. He merely nodded at the sight of me and handed over the elevator keycard. I didn't ask any questions. I wasn't sure I wanted the answers. The door opened into a vast space, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing a dull gray sky and seabirds slicing across the horizon. The air smelled faintly of bergamot and oak, clean, expensive, and foreign. Everything was arranged with sterile precision, as if the apartment were meant for shelter, not for living. I set the bag down and helped Sophie into one of the 2 bedrooms. She sighed softly, sinking into a bed that felt like a cloud, and fell asleep almost instantly. I didn't sleep. I wandered through each room, opened every cabinet and drawer. There were no papers, no photos, no trace of a permanent resident, but there was milk, medicine, bandages, and a stack of medical files labeled Sophie Carter neatly in the corner. I dropped into a chair, the folder trembling in my hands, overcome by a mix of gratitude and unease. Someone had prepared everything. Someone had known I would come. I didn't call Dominic. If he was behind this, he already knew where we were. I scrolled through my old messages, searching for some hint, some phrase that might reveal intent, but everything remained blank, just like that black card. By afternoon, while I was making tea, the doorbell rang a soft, deliberate chime. My heart pounded as I checked the monitor. The name on the screen was familiar. Vanessa. She stepped in with the chill of winter and the faint scent of lavender. Without waiting for an invitation, she removed her coat and set her bag down. "Dominic sent me. He knew you wouldn't call." I didn't ask how she had found me. I simply looked her in the eye. "He's watching me. He's protecting you," Vanessa replied without blinking. "There's a difference. I don't feel protected, because you don't know everything yet. Dominic needs you to understand this isn't just about you or your father anymore. Someone is hunting him. And you, whether you like it or not, are part of the prey." I gripped my teacup so hard my fingers went cold despite the heat. "I'm not a pawn. No," she said quietly. "You're the key." She stepped closer and placed a folded paper on the table, a handwritten address, firm, slanted, unmistakably masculine. "If you want to find him before they do, this is where you begin." I looked from the paper to her face. "Dominic won't come with me?" "He can't. But he's risking more than you know to give you this chance." When she left, I stood alone in the stillness of the apartment 30th floor. An unfamiliar city, an unsigned address, and a fragile promise that somewhere beyond all of this, someone was still alive, still waiting to be found. I knew then there was no turning back. The next morning, I found the postcard slipped under the door, just as pale light seeped through the frosted hallway glass. No knock, no sound, just a thin rectangle resting quietly on the floor, as if someone had left it while I slept. I bent to pick it up, and my chest tightened. On the front was an image of an ancient stone bridge arched over a silver river, the red rooftops of a city I had only ever seen in books. Ponte Vecchio, Florence. I turned it over. The handwriting was slanted, uneven, no sender's name, only a few short lines in English. The ink smudged slightly at the last word, as though the writer had hesitated for a long time before finishing. "Don't believe everything you hear. I've been watching you from afar. When you're ready, go to where the last light of the day touches the river." I read it 3 times, word by word, period by period. No address, no date, no way to respond, just a message carrying the trace of a man I had once cried myself empty to mourn. I sat motionless on the couch, the postcard on my lap, my fingers pale from gripping it. My thoughts churned like a storm, trapped inside a too small bottle. Dominic had been right. My father was alive, and now he was leaving breadcrumbs, turning our lives into some cruel game of hide and seek. I didn't know if he was doing it out of fear of being found or because he couldn't trust anyone, not even me. When Sophie woke, I slipped the postcard into my coat pocket before she could see it. I couldn't explain not, when her eyes were still rimmed with exhaustion and her fragile smile was barely holding back worry. I made her tea and told her we'd stay a few more days to rest. She nodded, relieved. Inside, though, a part of me wished I could believe that finding my father was a mistake, that it was better to let him remain hidden if his existence meant danger. But I had no choice. If I didn't search for the truth, someone else would. And if they reached him first, I would lose him again, this time for good. That afternoon, I called the number on the black card once more, leaving a short message. An hour later, Vanessa appeared at the door again, carrying a large envelope. Inside were a one-way plane ticket to Italy, under a false name, and a folded map of Florence with a single mark along the Arno River. I didn't ask how Dominic knew, didn't ask how he already had the ticket ready when I'd only just found the postcard. Whatever the reason, I knew by then I had long been part of his plan. That night, I left Sophie a handwritten letter 4 pages long, explaining what she needed to know and all that I still couldn't understand. I entrusted it to Vanessa with instructions not to open it unless I failed to return within a week. When I stepped into the airport, carrying nothing but a small bag, my passport, and the postcard pressed between the pages of my notebook, my heart was a tangle of resolve and doubt. I didn't know if my father truly wanted to be found, or if this was some strange test from a man who had lived in shadows for too long. But I knew I had to go, not for Dominic, not for the people chasing him, but for myself, for the child who had waited 20 years for one question to be answered. Why? And this time, I was going to demand the truth. Florence greeted me with a cold, mist-soaked morning. Pale gold sunlight filtered through the fog that hung over the red-tiled roofs, making the city look like a dream still half asleep. I rolled my suitcase slowly along the cobblestone street, the wheels clicking dryly against stone amid the hurried footsteps of locals. The mark on my map led me to a narrow alley tucked behind the Santo Spirito Square, quieter than the rest of the city, hidden from the crowds. I rented a small room on the 3rd floor of an old building with faded green shutters and a tiny balcony overlooking a withered grapevine shivering in the cold. The landlord asked few questions, only handed me the key, took my passport, and spoke a few Italian phrases I barely understood but enough to sense the guarded look in his eyes. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared again at the postcard. I was here, halfway across the world, chasing a few handwritten words, and a man I hadn't seen in 20 years, or perhaps wasn't sure I even wanted to see again. That afternoon I walked toward the bridge from the photograph. Ponte Vecchio was not what I had imagined. Smaller, busier, stranger with jeweler shops crowding its narrow walkway. I stood at the center, gripping the icy rail, watching the Arno drift silently beneath. The sun was lowering, turning the river's surface to molten gold, a beauty so breath-catching it almost hurt. I didn't know if my father had truly chosen this place for our reunion, or if I was just another piece in Dominic's elaborate game. The thought gnawed at me like a wound that refused to heal. Dominic had done too much, helped Sophie, saved us, shielded us. Yet he had also known everything about me without my ever telling him. He knew my father lived, knew where he hid, knew my movements hour by hour. And all of that led to one inescapable question. Was he using me? I was still turning that question over when I noticed a man standing a few yards away, a long coat, a felt hat, his face turned aside, his posture so familiar it made my heart stumble. I almost called out, but he turned quickly and walked off, swallowed by the crowd before I could be sure. I pushed through the tourists, crossed the street, shouting after him in vain. By the time I turned into a narrow alley behind the church, he was gone. I stood alone in the empty lane, my hands trembling with cold, and with the surge of disappointment rising like an undertow. When I returned to my room, darkness had fallen. On the table lay a thin brown envelope with no name. I tore it open, my fingers shaking. Inside was a small handwritten note in English, the same slanted hand as the postcard. Don't follow them. Wait one more night, Dad. I collapsed into the chair, my chest tightening. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't a trap. It was real. He was here. He knew I had arrived, and he was still keeping his distance. I didn't know who they were, Dominic, or the people hunting him. I didn't know who was pulling the strings in this game, or what I was to any of them. But at that moment I understood one thing. I couldn't fully trust anyone. Not Dominic, not my father, not anyone with a reason to keep me alive without letting me know the truth. And I knew that from this moment forward, I had to learn to steer my own story, whatever the ending might be. I couldn't sleep that night. Outside, Florence remained hushed, the occasional church bell echoing from afar, marking the slow passage of time. Inside the small room with its low ceiling and cold stone walls, I felt trapped between two worlds. One a past that had never truly closed, the other a present built on uncertainty. I unfolded the note again. Don't follow them. Wait one more night. Dad. My fingers traced the paper's edge, as if they might feel the breath he had left behind. I didn't know where he was, whether he watched me from some shadowed corner of this city, or whether he had already moved on, leaving only traces like before. Around 3 a.m, exhaustion finally overtook me. When I awoke, sunlight streamed through the shutters, glinting off the table where the note still lay beside a black cell phone I was certain wasn't mine. Someone had entered the room while I slept. The thought chilled me, yet strangely, I didn't panic. It felt almost familiar, that quiet intrusion, those unannounced appearances. I lifted the phone. One message waited. No sender's name, only a line of text. Santo Spirito, 11:30. Today, I glanced at my watch. It was already 10:45. I showered quickly, pulled on jeans, a dark sweater, and my wool coat. No makeup, none of this needed pretense. Everything today had to be real. I walked to the Santo Spirito Square, my heartbeat matching each echo of the church bell whenever someone entered through its gate. The square was as crowded as the day before, yet the air felt different, lighter steps, more stolen glances, the sharp sense of being watched. I sat on a stone bench near the fountain, willing my hands not to shake. At exactly 11:30, a boy of about 10 darted past, tossing something at my feet before vanishing into the crowd. I bent down and picked it up, a small folded scrap of paper. Inside, the familiar, urgent handwriting read, "Don't speak. Don't follow anyone. When the third bell rings, walk toward the cafe in the left-hand corner of the square." I did exactly as told. No questions, no glances. I waited. The bells tolled 3 times. I rose and walked toward the little cafe, its name chalked in white on a blackboard by the door. Inside, almost empty. Only one man sat near the back, silver hair, back to the door, holding a worn, leather-bound book. I wasn't sure until he looked up. The eyes were unmistakable, the same eyes I had carried in memory for 20 years, long after the face had faded. Thomas Carter. He looked at me, and in that instant, every question I had rehearsed dissolved into a wordless ache. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded softly, as if we had made this appointment long, long ago. And I walked toward him, step by step, uncertain whether I was still the 14-year-old girl who had lost her father, or the woman now trembling because she knew her life was about to change forever. I never imagined that the first day I would see my father again after 20 years would unfold in such silence. After that brief nod in the cafe, he gestured for me to follow him through a narrow back door that led to a small hidden garden enclosed by moss-covered stone walls. In the middle of that garden stood an old iron and glass greenhouse, the kind one might see in European films from another era. The glass door creaked softly as it opened, and we stepped into another world, dim light filtering through dusty panes, hanging pots spilling their green tendrils downward, and the air thick with the scent of licorice flowers mingled with damp earth. I stood there, facing the man who had once been the tallest figure in my childhood, now a stranger, as if I were looking at a memory that no longer belonged to me. He sat down on a wooden chair by a stone table and motioned for me to take the seat across from him. Still no greeting, no emotional questions, none of the reunions I had once imagined as a little girl. Only his eyes, that deep gray blue now streaked with red veins, witnesses to years of running. "You still like mint tea?" he asked after a long pause. His voice was hoarse, slow, yet strangely warm. I nodded, unsure how to begin. He poured the tea from an old ceramic pot and placed the cup before me. Even that small gesture felt so achingly familiar it hurt. "You've grown," he said quietly. "You look like your mother." I didn't respond, my hands tightening around the hot porcelain. "Why?" I asked at last. "Why did you disappear? Why did you leave Mom, leave me, and leave Sophie?" He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the greenery outside the glass walls. "Because if I had stayed, all 3 of you would have died with me. Back then I was the only one in my team who uncovered a string of leaks tied to a money laundering operation inside the organization I was consulting for. I reported it, thinking it would trigger an investigation. Instead, 2 days later, they set me up, a car crash. No body because that body wasn't mine. "And Mom?" I whispered. I thought letting her believe I was dead would be safer for all of you. A painful lie, but less dangerous than the truth. I had someone watch over you from afar, but there are things no one can control, like Sophie's illness, like the way you grew up inside that absence. His voice faltered. I thought vanishing would protect you, but the further I ran, the more I realized I was just hiding. I didn't know whether to hate him or pity him. My shoulders trembled despite my effort to stay composed. "I thought you were dead," I said, my throat tightening. I cried until I couldn't anymore. I couldn't understand how a father could disappear without a word. I hated you for it. I asked myself hundreds of times if you ever thought of me. He closed his eyes, clasping his hands together. "I thought of you every day. The first painting you made, the breakfast I cooked for you, the sound of your voice calling me when you were delirious with fever. Not one day passed without those memories, but I couldn't come back. Not when a single mistake could cost you your lives. I wanted to ask more, where he had gone, how he had lived, who he had become, but I knew time was slipping away from us. He knew it too. "Dominic found you," I said finally. "He told me someone is hunting you." My father nodded slowly. "Dominic belongs to a world I've tried to escape, yet he's the only one who didn't turn his back after learning the truth. If you're here, it means you trust him, at least partly. I don't know if he's using me or trying to help me." "And you think I didn't use you?" he asked softly. "The postcards, the messages, all of it was meant to bring you here, because I needed you. Not to exploit you, but to make things right, to see my daughter once more before I no longer can." I looked into the eyes I hadn't seen in decades, eyes filled with remorse and weariness, and in that moment, I was no longer a woman caught in a dangerous game between powerful men with blood-stained pasts. I was once again the little girl sitting before her father, realizing that sometimes love doesn't announce itself in presence, but in a lifetime of silent sacrifice. We left the greenhouse as light rain began to fall, drops tapping softly against the old glass. The sound followed us down the narrow streets like an unspoken warning. My father walked slowly beside me, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if he knew the thread of time allotted to him was fraying. When we reached the intersection near Ponte alla Caraya, he stopped, his gaze drifting toward the river rippling under the pale gray sky. I had a dozen questions still unspoken when a black car rolled to a stop beside the curb. The window lowered, and a familiar deep voice rose through the chill. "Dominic. Get in, Madeline. Both of you." My father frowned, silent, but tension flickered in his eyes sharper than fear. I opened the front door. He climbed into the back seat. No one spoke for several minutes. Only the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the steady thud of my heart matched the tire's hum against wet stone. Dominic spoke first. "I'll admit it, Thomas. You're better than I expected. It took me nearly a year to find your last trace." My father leaned back, voice gravelly but unyielding. "If you're smart enough to find me, you should also know there are things you shouldn't meddle in too deeply." Dominic let out a faint, humorless laugh. "I don't work for your people. I work for myself. And what I want is to end this game before more innocent lives get caught in it." "Like my daughters?" The question cut like a blade. I saw Dominic's knuckles tighten on the wheel, his jaw flex. "Madeline isn't a pawn. I'm not protecting her for you. I'm doing it because I owe her the truth, and because I believe she's the only one who can break this cycle." "You believe in a woman who lived 20 years without knowing what kind of world her father belonged to?" "I believe in her instincts," Dominic said, "and in her courage." He pulled the car to a stop by the riverbank and turned to face my father. "You can tell her the truth right now, or I will." Their eyes locked, two predators measuring each other in silence. No gunfire, no blood, just tension drawn tight as a wire. "What truth?" I demanded, my voice rising, anger coiling in my chest. "What are you both keeping from me?" My father exhaled, turned his head toward me. "Dominic didn't just protect you. He once worked for the same organization that hunted me. But he betrayed them. It was Dominic who leaked the intel that let me escape for the last time, and they killed his younger brother for it." I turned to Dominic. He didn't deny it, didn't look away. He simply nodded. "I have nothing left to lose," he said quietly. "But you do. Sophie does. And if Thomas dies without revealing the full truth, they won't stop. They'll come for you. This time, I won't let that happen." I felt as if I were caught between two worlds far larger than myself. One, my father, whom I had once mourned as dead. The other, the man who had entered my life with a single disarming line that changed everything. Dance with me. I didn't know whom I could trust, but I knew one thing for the first time: the choice was mine. I could walk away, pretend I had never come to Florence, never received a postcard, never found myself between two dangerous men whose pasts bled into my own. Or I could stay, listen to the end, and, for once in my life, refuse to let anyone else decide my fate. I don't remember exactly how I agreed, only that Dominic drove us in silence to a house on the outskirts of the city, far from the tourist center, where the cobblestone streets grew uneven and empty. The 3-story home carried a classic Italian charm, with a small balcony and a bare grapevine curling around its iron pillars. Dominic said it was a temporary safe house, rented under the name of an independent news organization, no connection to any of our real identities. My father sat quietly in the dark paneled living room, staring out at the moss-covered courtyard, while I sat across from Dominic, holding a cup of cold espresso, feeling drained, as if I had just stepped through an invisible threshold. "I need to know the entire plan," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Dominic looked at me, his eyes no longer carrying the challenge or control they once did when we first met, only exhaustion and something that looked almost like trust. "The organization is holding an encrypted list of accounts your father once had access to. They believe he still keeps a copy. If they get to it first, everyone behind the operation will walk away clean, no evidence left. But if we reach it before they do, we can expose everything. And you think I can make him hand it over?" "Not because you're his daughter," Dominic replied quietly. "Because he believes you're the only one without an agenda." I turned to my father. "Do you really still have a copy?" He stayed silent for a long moment before nodding. "But I can't release it yet. It's hidden in a place that requires 2 verifications. One is mine. The other belongs to your mother." His words froze both Dominic and me. "Mom is dead," I said, my voice dry. "Yes. But she left her verification code in a sealed letter, sent through a lawyer, kept in a Chicago bank. Only you have the right to open it." Dominic exhaled sharply and began to pace. "Then we have to go back to Chicago." "Now? There's no other way," my father said. "They won't wait. And if they sense what we're doing, they'll strike first." Dominic stopped and turned toward me. "The next available flight is tomorrow morning. You'll go with me. Thomas will take another route slower, to draw them off. You and I will get the verification, then head to where he hid the copy." "And if we don't make it?" I asked. "Then it ends there," Dominic said simply. "But at least you'll know you didn't keep running." I was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll go." Dominic tilted his head, saying nothing, though his gaze softened for just an instant. Then he turned back to my father. "You stay here. No calls, no internet, no contact with anyone. We'll be back in 3 days. If you don't hear from us by then, disappear." My father only nodded. Before Dominic left the room to prepare, I rose and faced him. "You owe me a promise," I said. He looked at me, and for the first time that day, he took my hand. "I promise. Whatever happens, I won't leave you alone again." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the hard bed in the small upstairs room, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the window frame, my heartbeat marking time like a warning that I was stepping into a game where every move could be the last. Yet for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I wasn't the child waiting for someone else to decide. I was part of the game now, and I was ready to risk everything to end it on my own terms. The flight back to Chicago passed in silence. Dominic sat beside me but didn't look at me once, his gaze fixed on the window where the dim morning light slid past like mist. I knew his mind was working, mapping escape routes, calculating betrayals, rehearsing contingencies, because at this point, there was no room for mistakes. When the plane landed at O'Hare, we exited through a side door arranged under the false identities Dominic had created before Florence. On paper, my name was Julia Rhodes, a financial researcher from Boston. Dominic was my husband, Edward Rhodes, a businessman. Every detail had been accounted for, even the cover story that we were visiting the bank to verify inheritance documents left by a relative. As we stepped into the sleek bank lobby, its polished glass and thick carpets underfoot, something in me tightened. The scent of varnished wood stirred memories of my mother taking me to the bank when I was little, back when she believed everything could be safe if kept in the right place. A silver-haired woman greeted us, requested identification and the verification code. I handed her the sealed envelope the lawyer had sent 20 years earlier, the one my father said my mother had prepared. She read my name, checked the signature, and led us into a private room with a secure vault. After several minutes, she returned with a heavy metal box and placed it before me. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside lay a handwritten letter, a small leather notebook, and a folded paper bearing a short string of numbers. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. The note pinned to the paper read, "Second biometric key, use only if you trust the one beside you completely." I handed it to Dominic. His eyes flickered, caught off guard. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "If she wrote that," I said, "it means she knew this day would come, and that you're the one I can trust." Dominic said nothing, but I saw his fingers tighten slightly around the paper, as if holding back something that stirred deep within. We left the bank through the rear exit, just as Dominic's satellite phone buzzed. A single message appeared, no signature, only 2 words. "They know." I didn't ask who they were anymore. I already knew. There was no time left for questions or doubts. We got into the car, weaving through multiple streets, driving against traffic for several minutes to throw off pursuit, before looping back toward an old neighborhood on the city's west side, where Dominic said my father had once kept a hidden apartment for storing classified data. When we arrived, he checked the lock's fingerprint and numeric code, then opened the door leading to the basement. The air was thick with the smell of metal and damp concrete, but I didn't hesitate. In the corner stood an old mechanical safe that required both a key and a combination. Dominic pulled a key from his coat pocket, one I had never seen before, and handed it to me. I slid it in, feeling the wheels turn beneath my fingertips. When the door clicked open, inside lay a hard drive sealed in shockproof plastic. Dominic lifted it out, set it on the table, and connected it to his laptop. The screen filled with rows of encrypted files, initials, account strings, years of transactions. He typed quickly, pulling up the master file. My eyes blurred as lines of data scrolled past until the final line froze me. My mother's name appeared among the regular transfer accounts, not as a recipient, but as a sender. I turned to Dominic, my voice trembling. "My mother, she was part of the organization?" His face darkened. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Thomas never told me." "Maybe he didn't know either," I murmured, but inside me, a hollow space was forming, one no explanation could fill. I had come searching for the truth, yet the closer I got, the more tangled everything became. Perhaps there was never a complete answer at all, only fragments, scattered pieces of a story I would have to piece together myself, even if the picture they formed was one I wasn't ready to face. I couldn't take my eyes off the name glowing on the screen, the cold capital letters among strings of coded symbols, account numbers, timestamps, and scattered European bank addresses. My mother's name, the woman I had once believed was my entire world, now sat quietly in the middle of those data lines like a question with no answer. Dominic stood beside me in silence. I could feel his gaze, but I couldn't look at him. I was afraid that if I did, I would cry, and I didn't want to cry anymore. I had shed enough tears. For a lost father, for a childhood without answers, for a truth hidden behind layer after layer of locked doors. I drew a slow breath, closed the laptop, slipped the hard drive into my bag. "We have to leave. They'll trace the signal if you stay connected any longer." He nodded without a word. We climbed the basement stairs and slipped out the back toward the car. Dominic drove in silence, the city sliding past us in muted streaks of gray. The ride back to the hotel felt like an endless pause, as though each of us was trapped inside our own orbit of unspoken thoughts. When we arrived, he handed me a cup of hot coffee and sat across the table, turning his phone slowly between his fingers. "They know you have the data," he said quietly, "and they won't let you leave the city unless there's a deal." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Tonight you'll meet them, one of the leaders, not to surrender it but to negotiate." I gave a short, hollow laugh. "I have nothing to bargain with." "You have your mother's name in the files," Dominic replied, meeting my eyes. "They're not sure what she revealed before she died. Fear is the greatest leverage we have." My hands tightened around the coffee cup. "And if I refuse? Then they'll erase you. And your father, and Sophie," quietly. I don't know how long I sat there without speaking. Only when Dominic reached across the table and brushed his hand against mine did I realize how fast my heart was beating. "I'll be there with you," he said. "But the final choice is yours." The meeting took place in a classic Italian restaurant buried deep within the old district, its cellar cleared and repurposed as an unofficial negotiation room. The man sitting across from me wore a gray suit, no tie, his silver hair neatly parted, his eyes the kind that had seen too many people to be surprised by anyone anymore. Dominic stood behind me, silent as a shadow. I placed the hard drive on the table but didn't push it toward him. "I have the data," I said evenly. "I don't want money. I want safety for my family. I want Sophie to live without looking over her shoulder. I want my father to stop running. I want it to end." The man listened without interrupting. When I finished, he lifted his wine glass, took a slow sip, then spoke. "And in exchange, I'll hand over a copy of the data, one with my mother's name removed. That's my condition." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing every syllable. Then he nodded. "The deal is accepted. But if any part of the data leaks any part at all, everything you've asked for will vanish." "I understand." We left the restaurant at midnight. Neither of us spoke on the drive back. Inside the hotel room, Dominic caught my arm before I could step away. "I don't like that you had to face them this way," he said, his voice low. "But you did what none of us dared to do." I wasn't sure if it was praise or warning, but when his hand brushed my cheek, his eyes no longer belonged to the man who had dragged me into the underworld. They were the eyes of someone who had stood beside me through the dark, even when everything was uncertain. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, "I promise no one will touch you, as long as I'm alive." And for the first time in years, I believed a promise. However fragile it was, I believed. The May wind off Lake Michigan stirred the drooping willow branches that brushed the water's surface, carrying with it the faint salt of the lake and the wild sweetness of early summer. I sat on a wooden bench by the shore, watching the small ripples roll toward the sand, feeling a quiet peace I hadn't known in a long time. 6 months had passed since that night, the night I set the hard drive on the table and met the gaze of a man whose nod could have erased everything. Yet, I was still here. Sophie was still here. And so was my father. After the deal, Dominic disappeared for several weeks. No goodbye, no message, no trace. I thought I had been left behind again, as I always had been. But then, one early morning in my new apartment near the lake, I received a short letter, no sender's name, only a single line written in his hand. "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to stay. Don't forget how brave you were." I kept that letter in my desk drawer beside the unfinished sketches for my first gallery exhibition. Painting was something I had abandoned long ago, buried under years of running, of masks, of unanswered questions. But for the first time in years, I picked up a brush not to forget but to remember my mother, my father's eyes in the Florence greenhouse, Sophie's laughter when she learned she could continue her treatment through a special program Dominic had arranged before leaving. I no longer lived in fear, though I had no illusions about perfect safety. People like us, like Dominic, like my father, never truly returned to normal lives, but I had learned we could still choose how to live with our scars. There were footsteps behind me, soft and familiar. I didn't need to turn. Sophie sat beside me, her hair longer now, her skin warmer and pinker after months without hospital walls. She smiled. "You're thinking about Dominic again, aren't you?" I nodded, not hiding it. "I always do when I look at the lake. Remember the first time we came here when he drove you to that follow-up appointment after the new treatment?" "Of course. I remember he stood right there, by the wooden bridge, looking at you without saying a word, like he already knew he was leaving." I smiled faintly, eyes still on the water. He had already left long before that in his mind, but strangely, I never felt abandoned. It's as if he's still out there, watching, waiting, and he'll come back when he needs to. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder. "You really think he'll come back?" I didn't answer right away. Some things don't need words, like longing, like gratitude, like faith. I only nodded softly. "I do." Far above, the thin clouds began to scatter, and the last light of day turned the lake to gold. I took my sister's hand, feeling her pulse steady beneath my fingers, steady as the calm water, as the quiet faith that had carried me through it all. And I knew, even if the past still lingered somewhere behind us, my future began right here, by the lake, with life, and with a promise that had never been broken. The morning unfolded like any other, yet something in the air made my heart beat a little faster. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of the small lakeside gallery, where I had spent the past 3 months completing my first collection since returning to painting. People called it a solo exhibition, but to me, it felt more like a quiet unburdening after years of living behind walls of doubt, fear, and questions that never had complete answers. I stood alone in the room before the doors opened, gazing at the paintings hung neatly on the white walls. The space glowed with a soft, warm light. The first piece was a semi-abstract portrait of my mother, a woman whose eyes held both tenderness and distance, her hands fading into the brushstrokes as if dissolving into memory. The second painting was of Sophie, laughing beneath the sky over Lake Michigan, her hair flying, sunlight shimmering behind her as if life itself had bloomed around her once more. The third was a shadow without a face, every stroke trembling with an ache that whispered a name. Dominic never let anyone photograph him, never left anything behind but a promise. Yet in my art, he existed more vividly than anyone else. He was the streak of light across the night, the quiet glance from the dark corner, the steady breath I felt each time I picked up a brush. I didn't know if he would come, nor did I expect anything certain, but I painted with everything that remained inside me, hoping that if he paused even for a moment before one of the canvases, he would know I still remembered. Guests arrived as noon approached. They moved slowly, stopping before each painting, some nodding, others whispering. I stood in a corner, watching while trying to steady my breathing. Sophie came later, wearing the deep blue dress I had chosen for her, her face radiant amid the quiet crowd. She hugged me tightly, then pulled me into the center of the room as if to tell everyone, "This is my sister, the one who survived what could not be spoken." A local journalist asked for a brief interview, and I agreed. She wanted to know why I had returned to painting and why I titled the exhibition The Remaining Light. I simply said that sometimes people must walk through great darkness to realize the light was never far. It was always hidden in the way we learn to see ourselves again. When the speech ended, I stepped back from the crowd, taking photos and chatting. I stood before the final painting, the one I created without a plan or structure, just an open sky, streaks of light cutting through the night, and a solitary figure walking away. No one knew who it was, and I didn't need them to. I only hoped someone might find a reflection of themselves within it. And then, I saw him. I couldn't tell if it was real or an illusion, but when I turned, among the people leaving the gallery stood a familiar silhouette at the doorway. His eyes met mine just for a breath, like wind brushing past. No words, no steps closer. But that look said everything, that he had come, that the promise had never been forgotten, and that no matter how far apart we drifted, we still had pieces of light to follow home. He left soon after, as he always did, yet I didn't feel sadness. This time, I didn't feel left behind. I turned back to Sophie and held her hand tight. Outside, the late-day sun poured through the glass, scattering over each canvas like a quiet whisper of faith. I smiled. In this world, light doesn't have to blaze to be real. Sometimes it only needs to be enough to keep us from falling. And I had found it among the scars, among the colors, among all that was unfinished but still alive with hope. That evening, after the gallery had closed and the last guest had gone, I stood alone again in the stillness, surrounded by the lingering pulse of emotion radiating from the paintings. The warm, golden light from above bathed the final canvas in a soft halo, the same spot where I had seen Dominic only hours before. I still wasn't sure if what I'd seen was real, or a vision conjured by a heart not yet ready to close. I turned to leave when footsteps sounded behind me. I knew it was him. Some things the heart recognizes before reason can catch up. Dominic walked toward me, his eyes calmer now, carrying the quiet desire to stay. He was no longer the man always ready to disappear. He reached out his hand without a word. I touched it, his fingers were still warm, just like that first night at the Mirage when his hand found the small of my back. Then, we had stood amid strangers. Now, it was only the two of us in a room filled with memory. There was no music, no audience, but Dominic whispered in that low, familiar voice I had dreamed of countless nights. "Dance with me." I nodded. No rehearsed gestures, no perfect steps, only quiet movement, our bodies remembering a rhythm older than words. And in that moment, I understood that happiness doesn't need a perfect ending. Sometimes a single honest moment, a single touch that holds all its meaning, is enough to rewrite an entire life. My story was never a fairy tale. It was marked by scars, secrets, sacrifices, and moments when I nearly broke. But those were what taught me something simple and profound, that happiness isn't having everything, it's cherishing what remains. That sometimes the old wounds are where the light finds its way in, and that no one has to be perfect to be worthy of love. Dominic didn't promise forever, and I no longer asked for it. But we stood there together, in the room that once held our past, taking the first steps into something new, gentle, real, and fearless. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us through the journey of Madeline, Dominic, Sophie, and Thomas. This story may not mirror your life, yet perhaps somewhere within it lies a truth you've felt before: loss, forgiveness, choice, family, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the road is unknown. If you've ever felt left behind, ever stood at a crossroads unsure of who you are, then you understand how strong Madeline had to be to find herself again. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever thought that sometimes all it takes is someone reaching out and saying, "Dance with me," for you to believe in love again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what your heart has to say. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so more people can hear these quiet, soulful tales each day. We promise to keep bringing you stories that touch the heart and inspire hope, kindness, and love. Thank you for staying with us till the very end. Wishing you health, peace, and a life filled with gentle light. Goodbye and see you in the next story.